It had been a long 9 months, but now all was well as I was returning home to the United States to my loving wife Tracy, to whom I had been married for 7 years. My Marine Special Forces team consisted of me and 3 others, and we had been deployed on multiple missions over the past few years, but this was the first time we had been deployed overseas for more than a month. I have been in the Marines for 12 years, joining right out of high school at the age of 18. Apparently, I have useful skills, and I was quickly promoted to the position of team leader in our small special unit. In fact, the Marines valued my skills so much that when I tried to finish my service after 4 years, they offered me incredible terms to stay on part-time. They even paid for my 5 years of pharmacy school and made sure that my current employer, a large national pharmacy chain, understood that I sometimes needed to take several weeks of unpaid leave. The other 3 guys on my team got similar conditions, so when we get called up, we know we're working with the best. It can be an incredibly stressful life, but I am proud to say that I am a patriot and the guys on my team have become closer to me than brothers. Most of the time, I'm a laid-back pharmacist in a small southeastern town. I make good money, and with Tracy, who is a teacher, we have our own toys in a nice house in a nice area. The only real downside to this idyllic life is that my stupid relatives live only an hour away, and Tracy believes that as a family we should share our lives with people who I think are, frankly, disgusting bastards. They say if you want to know what your wife will be like in 20 years, look at her mother. Well, if I believed that, I would never have married Tracy. It's not that her mother isn't pretty, she looks pretty good for a 50-year-old, but she's a manipulative, fucking bitch, and I think that's putting it mildly. She's not the smartest of bulbs, prone to bias, and smokes like a locomotive. But somehow she always gets her way, largely due to the fact that my father-in-law is deathly afraid of arguing with her or, God forbid, getting a look of disapproval. To be honest, he's not a bad guy himself. Small children and animals love him. Perhaps he could have killed her because any court in the country would have found it justifiable murder. And then there's Tracy's sister, who I call the easy girl, and her idiot brother. I grew up in an ordinary average family: husband, wife, son, daughter. My parents died young, so I've been alone with my sister for the last 8 years. She lives on the East Coast with her husband, a nice guy, but I don't see them often. And here Tracy is the light of my life. She's a 5'1" goddess with long blonde hair, big perky breasts, an ass to die for, and brains, at least when she's not around her family. Unfortunately, when she is with her family too long, she reverts to their stupidity, and all I can do is get her out of the house before her ick drops to 0. We've discussed this many times, and although she knows she's doing it, she says she feels helpless to stop. I first met my goddess when I attended the University of Iowa College of Pharmacy in Iowa City, Iowa. After making the deal with the Marine Corps, I was a 22-year-old freshman living off campus in a small apartment. Tracy and I were both vying for one parking spot in one of the lots near campus, and being the gentleman I am, I backed down and gave it to her. I parked 2 rows behind, and when I got out of the car and headed towards the pharmacy building, she was waiting for me in the parking lot. We hit it off immediately, and 3 blocks from where she was going, I learned that she was 21 and a third-year education major. We agreed to meet that day at 4 o'clock at a local cafe, and I spent 2 hours drinking coffee while she drank a latte and chatted about everything. I was fascinated. She was fascinated by me too, because by the end of the year, she moved in with me and lived with me her entire senior year. We got married shortly after the school year ended, and she took a job as a teacher while I finished my degree. I told Tracy as much as I could about my deal with the Marines, and given that her father was an Army veteran, she seemed to understand that there would be times when I would have to be away on missions. Her parents made no secret of the fact that I was not their choice for Tracy's husband. That honor belonged to Randy Phelps, Tracy's ex-boyfriend, whom she broke up with before her 3rd year at Iowa. They dated for 5 years, and Randy was the son of the owner of a funeral home in their town, so by her parents' logic, Randy was set for life, especially after his father sold him the business in the future. I learned this the first time I met her family when we were still dating. We went to her parents' house for the 4th of July, and who did you think was there? Of course, Randy. Tracy's mother, by the way, her name is Mona, made it clear to me that Randy was practically part of the family, and after she and Tracy had sex for 5 years before they broke up, she was surprised that there were no grandchildren from Randy in her house. Tracy blushed at these words. I kept my face neutral, knowing that this was said for my benefit, and noticed that Randy had a smug smile on his face. When we were alone later, Tracy apologized to me for her mother's remark and for having sex with Randy. I told her that what she did with Randy before she met me was part of her past that I didn't need to know, just like I didn't tell her about my past relationships. Judging by her expression, she wasn't thinking about my past at all, especially since I never mentioned past girlfriends. We spent 4 days with Tracy's family, and Randy was there for 3 of them. Her mother, Mona, made several comments about how close Tracy and Randy were. Did you tell your mother about every single sexual encounter you had with this guy? I asked her at some point when we were alone. I never told my mother about my sex life, she replied, but I'm sure Randy kept her fully informed. I didn't try to call Tracy before we landed in the United States because military flight arrival times were never precise, but as soon as we landed in New York, I pulled out my cell phone and dialed her number. The call went straight to voicemail, and although it annoyed me, I left a message saying I'd be home in 4 hours. Since each of my team members lived in different parts of the country, it was time for us to split up to return to our loved ones. I hugged each of them tightly, and they returned the hug. Men are embarrassed to tell each other that they love each other, but each of us knew what was in the other's heart. When I landed in Nashville, I contacted a rental car company for a 2-hour ride home. I tried calling Tracy again, but the call went to voicemail again. What the heck, I thought. I left a message again, this time saying I was on my way home. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Tracy. Maybe the 9 months of separation made me forget what her happy voice sounded like, because I thought she sounded more tense than happy. Philly, she said, using the nickname only she had ever called me. I'm now with my mom and dad, spending a few days while the children are on vacation. Why don't you come here and everyone can see you? It seemed to me that there was some kind of grumbling of approval behind Tracy, so I said okay and mentally added another hour to my trip. I didn't want to see her whole family, and after 9 months of abstinence, I was just going crazy at the thought of celebrating with my beloved wife, which, apparently, would have to be postponed while we were with her parents. When I arrived at her parents' house, I expected Tracy to run out of the house and throw herself on my neck. Instead, no one greeted me. I shook my head in disgust and noticed the cars parked on the street. Her brothers, her sisters, and Randy's. Son, I took my things and headed towards the door. As I approached the porch, Tracy's father, Ralph, opened the door and shook my hand. Then I looked past him and saw my dear Tracy in the center of the living room, looking gorgeous in a blue satin robe that hugged her large breasts and 6-month pregnant belly beautifully. And RRRRGGGGG, what the hell is this? I shouted, walking through the door. Nobody answered me. Everyone seemed to disappear from my sight except Tracy. She seemed to cower as she stood there as I walked towards her and stopped a foot away from her face. What the hell are you, a cheating bitch? I've never been so inclined to hit a woman in my life, but luckily for Tracy, my parents taught me better. My brain was running a million miles an hour in 14 different directions. Even though I was an elite military operator, I was not prepared for this. My wife got pregnant while I was deployed. And I bet we all know whose baby it is, I screamed in her face, pointing at her belly, which was protruding enough to prevent me from getting any closer to her face. I turned to where Randy stood, grinning. The grin immediately disappeared and was replaced by panic as I moved towards him. When I got within 2 feet of him, he pulled a .22 caliber pistol from behind his back and pointed it in my direction. I'll blow your damn head off if you take another step, he shouted to me. Not with the safety switch on, you wimp. I shouted back, knocking the gun out of his shaking hands. If you point a gun at me again, I'll shoot your entire household. I sat down on the sofa, covered my face with my hands, and cried. It was a nightmare in many ways that I never could have foreseen. I don't know how long I sat there crying, but eventually Tracy came over, sat next to me, and gently hugged me. This brought me out of my stupor, and I pulled away from her touch, looking at her as if she were a leper. Judging by her reaction, she was both scared and offended. I wiped my tears with my sleeve, looked at her, and asked in a voice that was much calmer than I felt inside, "How could you do this to me, to us? Nothing in my life was more important than you." "Oh, please, are you going to tell us you haven't slept with any civilian contractor or local in 9 months? Were we born yesterday?" My mother-in-law intervened. "Ralph was in the army. He knows. That's what you all do on long tours." "Apparently not everyone, Mona," I replied. "I didn't do it, and I know many others who didn't. Yes, I know many who do, but in my case, no, never." I looked back at Tracy. Admittedly, she looked beautiful with a large pregnant belly. It was just a pity that this belly was carrying another man's child. "I was lonely. I missed you, and yes, I wanted to," Tracy began, looking at the floor. "So I started driving home on the weekends, and when my mom kept saying you're sleeping with someone there, I decided I might as well do it, and do it with Randy, because it doesn't mean going to bars looking for men." "You already knew that they slept together for years before you came along, so it wasn't anything new," Mona chimed in again. "So I'd come over on the weekends, and we'd have sex here at the house, in my old room, or at his house," Tracy continued. "And a couple of months later, I became pregnant. Since neither you nor I believe in abortion, and we were trying to have children, we could raise this child as our own, sort of like if we adopted a child. Randy even said he'd let you adopt the baby after it's born." "Of course he did," I replied, looking at Randy's grinning face. The smirk disappeared as soon as he saw me looking at him. "You let them have sex in her old room?" I asked Ralph in surprise. "What kind of father allows his married daughter to cheat with another man under his roof? What kind of fucking idiot are you?" Ralph mumbled, but couldn't find the words. His son, meanwhile, was outraged that I called his father a damn idiot and quickly approached me. As he approached threateningly, my military training immediately kicked in, and I punched him in the throat, leaving him on the floor, gasping for breath. I think that's the end of the conversation. I got up, left the house, got into the car, and drove back to my house. The drive home seemed shorter than usual because my mind was on a million things and time flew by quickly. The main point was that Tracy said she cheated on me because her mother was sure I cheated, and then she thought that I would raise another man's child as my own, as if we were adopting him. It sounded so much like her mother that I wanted to punch both of them. Right before I rolled into town, I called my two best friends, Bobby James and Willie Marsh, and asked them to meet me at Rosie's, our favorite bar. They both sounded reluctant on the phone, but eventually agreed. I knew why they were reluctant. I assigned both of them to look after Tracy while I was away, and they failed at it. They both knew that this meeting would be a showdown. I arrived at Rosie's at 10 and found Bobby and Willie sitting in a booth as far from the entrance as possible. They already had beers, but I ordered 3 more from the bar and took them to the table. When I put the bottles down, they both hugged me, but couldn't look me in the eyes. This didn't surprise me. It turned out that I had to wait a few more minutes for something that really surprised me. I didn't waste time and got straight to the point. "What the hell? You guys were supposed to be covering for me," I began accusingly, trying to keep my voice low. "We covered Phil when she was in town, but she went to her parents' house every Friday right after school, so we didn't see her at all on the weekends," said Bobby, a lanky black guy who was 3 years younger than me. But he graduated from college with me. "And then when I came over to your house one evening, I noticed that her belly was getting a little bigger, so I consulted my friend Willie." Willie was a year younger than Bobby, a burly white guy who had graduated from the University of Iowa, but that didn't stop us from becoming friends, although he put up with a lot of Cal College jokes. Bobby, and I met him playing basketball at one of the local schools, and from then on we became inseparable. Willie nodded in agreement and continued the story. So I went over to your house about 2 weeks later in the evening, and damn, Bobby was right. She was pregnant, and we knew you weren't the father. So what the hell? No one could write to me or leave an email. Something. Both lowered their heads. Bobby finished his story. We both went to your house the next week and confronted her, said we were going to tell you what we knew, but she begged us not to, so we didn't. We thought it was too late for you to do anything, since she was already pregnant at this stage. So, because she begged you, you betrayed all your loyalty to me? I asked in disbelief. Well, she was very persuasive, Phil, Bobby replied slowly. The light bulb above my head lit up, and my jaw dropped in disbelief. Are you telling me that you both slept with my pregnant, cheating bitch wife to avoid telling me that she was pregnant by another man? Damn it, guys. I hope it was worth it. My voice rose several decibels, and the entire back end of the bar probably heard my outrage. I heard a few whispers, and a quick glance around showed that everyone who knew me already knew that Tracy was pregnant, and it wasn't my baby. Couldn't be mine. I am a joke for everyone. Bobby and Willie stood up and quietly left the bar. I handed my car keys to the waitress and asked her to write down my address on her pad so I could be taken home in a taxi by closing time. Time for even more beer. When the taxi driver brought me home sometime after 2 o'clock in the morning, Tracy was already there. She greeted me at the door wearing the same blue satin robe she had previously worn at her parents', and through my fog, she looked like a pregnant goddess to me, a cheating damn bitch goddess. She tried to take my hand, but I pushed her away, turned to the taxi driver, and introduced her to him. John, my taxi driver hero, I muttered. This is my cheating wife, who is carrying another man's child. Come on, John, you can laugh at me too. Then I went to the bathroom on the first floor and vomited everything out. I woke up sometime in the afternoon on the bathroom floor with a small nuclear war in my head. I slowly made my way to the kitchen, where there was a kettle of coffee on the stove, and poured myself a mug. Tracy was sitting at the table reading today's newspaper when I walked up to the counter, grabbed a bottle of aspirin, and sat down at the table next to her. It might have been the hangover, but I was pretty sure there was smoke coming out of her ears. But since my offense was not as serious as hers, I decided to don't care. We sat there, reading, and I was half alive, for about 20 minutes before she finally said to me, "Don't you think you should apologize for last night with the taxi driver?" I thought my head was going to split open. "Don't you think you should apologize for that?" I replied, pointing at her pregnant belly. "At least I don't call you nasty names," she shouted at me. "You don't need to. All you have to do is walk around and everyone gets the joke. I'm a cuckold, and you did this to me while I wasn't even in the country. So even a blind man can see that you cheated on me, and yet you seem to be proud of yourself, despite the fact that everyone knows that you are an easily accessible woman. So if I didn't call you something nice last night, I didn't call you by name. I described you exactly. Oh, by the way, Bobby and Willie say hi to you." It wasn't even subtle. Tracy actually shrank. "Did you think I wouldn't find out about this? How stupid are you?" I asked. "Why do you think I returned home in such a state? It's not every day you find out that your two best friends slept with your wife who was pregnant by another man. You knew what you did was wrong, and then you added to it by sleeping with my two best friends, so I wouldn't find out you were pregnant for another few months. Whose brilliant plan was this, your mother?" "Sort of," she answered quietly. "You know, I always joke that you lose your ick when you're with your family too long, and everything you've said and done just confirms that. So now, what's the genius plan? What do you realistically see happening to this relationship other than the quickest divorce I can get from you? Mom says you won't divorce me because you love me too much, and since you cheated on me while you were in the service, that just makes us even." "Where does she get all this about me cheating on you?" I interrupted. "Well, Dad told her that all the military guys do it," she answered confidently. "He even said he did it himself." "Well, honey, here's the news. Just because your father is an idiot and a lecher does not make us all traitors. I'll take a lie detector test to prove it, and then when I file for divorce on the grounds of infidelity, I'll get whatever I want. Since most of my belongings were already packed in my backpack, I took my suitcase and packed enough civilian clothes to last me a couple of weeks. Plus, I packed a few personal items that I didn't want to leave behind. I loaded them into the taxi when it arrived and asked the taxi driver to take me to my car at Rosie's and then found a cheap motel. While I was packing and getting my things together, Tracy kept telling me that she loved me and that we could get through this. At one point, she started crying, which touched my heart, but I went into mission mode and kept going. I know you can't just stop loving someone you've adored for so long in an instant, but her pregnant belly served as a clear reminder of her infidelity, and every time I looked at her, I felt like my love goes to her. She was talking on the phone, probably to her parents, when the taxi arrived, and without looking in her direction, I loaded my things into the taxi and drove off. The next day was Monday, and when I got to work, the first thing I did was tell my boss about my problem and ask if he knew a good lawyer with a tough character. Funny you should say that. I have the right person for you, he said. It turned out that his niece was a lawyer in a small firm in the city, and one of her specialties was divorce. She was the most mischievous girl you've ever seen, and by the looks of it, she hasn't changed much. She should have become a lawyer. She's too angry for any other job, he said. He pulled her business card out of his Rolodex and handed it to me. I called her right away, explained my circumstances, and was able to make an appointment for 2 days later over lunch, which she noted was paid for by me. On Wednesday, I came to work early to take a long lunch break. By 1 p.m., I was at a fancy restaurant waiting for Leanne Lazaro, a lawyer. She came at 1:02 p.m., and I mean she came. Was it a lawyer? She looked like a supermodel. I thought she couldn't be a good lawyer if she looked like that, but after 5 minutes of talking, I realized that she was as smart as she was beautiful. I didn't quite understand what she was talking about, but I was deep in contemplation of her aesthetic when she literally snapped her fingers in my face, bringing me back to reality. Listen, buddy, we're talking about serious business for decent money. You should get your head out of the clouds or wherever you got it from, she commanded. I have to admit, I felt pretty stupid acting like a 15-year-old on a first date. We were talking about divorcing my wife, and I was ogling another woman. She did not ignore this either. What kind of person stares at his lawyer while discussing divorce, buddy? I have to say, I'm not impressed. But since you came on Uncle John's recommendation, I will give you a chance, she said. I'm sorry, I really am, but I haven't been with a woman in over 9 months, and I was expecting my wife this weekend, and that didn't happen. And I muttered, almost inaudibly. So you really didn't cheat, right? She asked. No, I didn't cheat. I'm married and take my vows seriously. Not everyone there is like that, I understand, but I'm not one of them. Marriage is for life, and not just for convenience, I replied. Okay, buddy, how do you want to play this? You can be a good guy and give her half of everything, or you can take revenge and try to leave her nothing. And really, given what she did to you, I think you're justified in playing hardball, and I'm just the lawyer you need. Last week, I loved Tracy more than life itself, I began, but I'm not a love-struck puppy who can't see the truth. She completely broke my heart, and although I will probably love her a little for the rest of my life, she has used up most of my patience. I want to be a vindictive bastard. Let her stupid dad and family worry about her. I knew you had the potential to be a fun customer, buddy. Since we didn't live in a state that allowed no-fault divorce, her cheating on me, especially while I was in the military, could have cost her dearly in the divorce, Leanne explained. I just had to be strong enough not to give in when she started crying. I told Leanne to go all the way. 2 weeks later, she showed me the first draft. Based on Tracy's infidelity, she asked the court to give me a 75/25 division of assets, no alimony, and of course no child support. I was confused by the last one considering I wasn't there when the baby was conceived and it couldn't have been mine. But Leanne pointed out that some of the more liberal judges would sometimes still force the husband to pay for the child if, in their little minds, the husband might induce infidelity. We weren't going to be nice here and there was no way I was ever going to agree to support this kid. For her part, Tracy continued to blow up my phone with calls, leaving messages about how much she loved me and how we could get through this. In one of the messages, she said that she and Randy had not had sex since they received the message that I was coming home. It had to show me something, she said. Apparently, I wasn't smart enough to realize what it was, and I never called back. 2 weeks later, on a Friday night, I was having dinner at the bar at the Shoe, a cozy BBQ restaurant near my work, chatting with a couple of 20-something girls sitting to my left, when Tracy appeared on my right side, leaned in very close and whispered, "Hello, love." I didn't see her come in, and since I was looking to the left, I didn't notice her coming from the right, so I was a little surprised to hear her in my right ear. I moved back a little on the stool and looked at her, and as had happened so many times in the past, she completely swept me off my feet. Even though she was now 7 months pregnant, she was still a goddess in a short black loose dress that hugged her beautifully, leaving no doubt that she was braless. I noticed how the girls in their 20s looked at her carefully, and she immediately raised her left hand and showed her rings. Both girls immediately turned away from me and began talking quietly to each other, like schoolgirls who had just been reprimanded by their mothers. "Sorry, I don't remember us making an appointment or dinner," I said coldly. "We didn't agree, but I thought you could always spend time with your wife," she replied. "At the end of the day, we're still married. Can you find us a table? I'd rather not try to sit on one of those bar stools." I quickly found a hostess, and she had us seated at a table within 10 minutes. "So why are you following me? And by the way, you look great. Pregnancy suits you," I said as the waitress took Tracy's order and we carried my food from the counter to the table. "Well, thank you, sir," she said in a jokingly solemn tone, but then got down to business. "I'm here because you don't answer my damn calls when I call and you don't answer my texts. We can't fix this if you keep running away from me." "Tracy, I couldn't be more serious. We can't fix this. Not only did you cheat on me behind my back, but you are also carrying another man's child. This child is proof of your disrespect for me, and I will not knowingly raise another man's child. And I could never ask a mother to choose between me and her child. My mother said that your pride will prevent us from getting back together." "Don't mention that bitch again unless you want to finish this dinner alone," I interrupted. She never hid the fact that she didn't love me or respect me, and she never hid the fact that she wanted you to marry Randy. They wanted everything. Well now, as soon as you are free, you can go out. What your mother calls pride, I call self-respect. I come home serving our country and you're pregnant by another man. I wasn't even in the country when you cuckolded me. For God's sake, Tracy, you could just pee on me in public. How could I look at myself in the mirror in the morning to shave? But think about it, Phil. Let's say we get divorced and later you meet a woman you want to marry and have children with. If you love her, you will raise another man's children then. So it's your pride again." It was a twisted way of looking at things, but she was indeed right. The conversation continued throughout dinner, but I thought we were done when I paid the bill and we got up to leave. As we walked out into the parking lot, Tracy gave me her best inviting look and asked if we wanted to dance, something we hadn't done in years. I was stunned, but said we could and took her to the Cove, a restaurant and dance bar on the other side of town. We got a small table at the edge of the dance floor, and at Tracy's insistence, we walked out onto the dance floor. Her large, braless, pregnant breasts swayed and swayed during the fast songs, and I felt myself getting aroused watching it. Then, when the ballad started playing, she pressed herself against me, and I'm sure she sensed my excitement. "Should we do something about this?" she whispered in my ear. By this point, I could barely think clearly. It's been 10 months since I made love to her. "Why don't we go home and I'll show you what you missed," she said. I could barely think, but I knew that if I returned to our old house, she would have her way, and I would be left with the mark of a cuckold. "No, my apartment is much closer," I muttered. She was naked and in my bed minutes after we got to my place. It was pure animal copulation, without love, and Tracy loved it. As we both returned to Earth, Tracy looked at me with love and passion, a look that I had seen and appreciated hundreds of times in the past. I saw the thoughts swirling around in her head. "Do you feel better now? Have you regained your place as my lover?" she asked. "Can we stop this scam now?" "Actually, I feel better because this is the first time in 10 months that I have made love to a woman," I replied. "But now, have I regained my place as your lover?" "No, I'm afraid you gave this place to Randy. But since we are still legally married at this point, I didn't mind taking his woman, thus making him a cuckold. Under normal circumstances, I would never go after another man's woman, but in this case, I made an exception. I just slept with a woman who is pregnant with his child." The loving and passionate gaze disappeared, replaced by anger, then shame, when she fully realized that in trying to please me with sex, I was instead using her as an easily accessible girl. We got dressed in silence, got into my car, and I drove her to her car parked in the restaurant parking lot. We didn't talk in the car on the short drive to the restaurant, and I could almost hear the steam coming out of her ears. She got out of my car, looked at me sadly, and thanked me for dinner. I was gentleman enough to thank her for the evening. After what happened on Friday night, I didn't expect Tracy to show up unannounced anywhere I was. Her mother, however, was a different story, and 2 days later she showed up unannounced at my workplace, with her big mouth as always. My boss immediately called me into the office and told me that I needed to talk to her right now at the cafe next door and keep her as far away from him as possible. It was nice to have someone else see her good side for a change. I calmed her down, took her out of the office, and took her to the Starbucks around the corner. Once we got our orders and sat down, she started lecturing me about what a selfish bastard I was and how I was breaking her daughter's heart. "What difference does it make to you? You never loved or respected me, so why should you care?" I asked. "Because they blame me for all this. 'Cause you're apparently the last guy left in the world who can hold his own equipment in pants. What did you do to her on Friday night?" "We had sex, but not like before. She was Randy's bitch, and I owned her. It's simple. No love, no hugs, no kisses." "So that's it," Mona said. "No second chance for the woman you've loved for 7 years." "Second chance? Are you fucking kidding me?" I said, my voice getting louder and my face starting to turn red, I'm sure. This was not a small accident. It was, "I'm lonely, my husband isn't around so he won't mind if I have sex with my ex-boyfriend every weekend. Oops, I got pregnant." "How do you get a second chance out of this, you stupid bitch? You just feel bad because you wanted it, helped it happen, and now she blames you. You can go to hell, all of you. Now don't you dare show up at my place of work again, because the next time you do, I'll put a restraining order on you so fast your head will spin." I got up and left Starbucks. Mona had to walk to her car. If I was really smart, I would take her to Starbucks on the other side of town. 2 weeks later, Tracy was notified of the divorce. I didn't see it, didn't hear about it, didn't care. Her lawyer, an old friend of her mother's, tried to negotiate better terms, but my young shark said no, in legalese, of course. I was thinking about asking this woman out on a date after the divorce was finalized, and I was no longer her client. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. The court gave me everything I asked for. You can't abuse a veteran like Tracy did and not get punished in a state that still has a fault-based divorce law. Tracy gave birth to Randy's baby, a girl, about a month before the divorce was finalized. I heard from mutual friends. I didn't send a gift. About 3 months after the baby was born, Tracy married this idiot, just as I expected. After my shark left her with little to live on, she had to either marry Randy or move back in with her parents. "No death," I said through my burner phone to my second in command on my Marine team. 6 weeks later, I was sitting in a biker bar across town from my apartment, looking into the half-closed eyes of my ex-mother-in-law, who had sex with my friend in a booth at the back of the bar. She began to regain consciousness after I drugged her when I met her at another bar, ostensibly to see how Tracy and the baby were doing. She was surprisingly friendly to me when we met, and still a little sweaty from a tennis match she had just finished with one of her friends. I deliberately timed the meeting to be right after her weekly tennis match, so she would be wearing lighter clothing, making it easier for Chaz and me. She drank half the gin and tonic I ordered for her in one gulp. It only took a few minutes before she found herself semi-conscious from what I had drugged her, and with my knowledge I was able to ensure that the drug would quickly leave her system without being detected in the hospital. I took her hand and led her to my car, sat her down and drove her to a biker bar where Chaz, my former colleague, was waiting with several members of his gang. When we got to the back of the bar, I quickly and quietly removed Mona's tennis shorts and panties and sat her on Chaz's lap. At that moment, there were about half of the people in the bar. This attracted several people who came closer and took seats in adjacent booths. It was very kind of you to entertain my friend, but before you start making up anything else, there are at least 6 people here who heard you agree to his sexual proposal, making it a consensual interaction. Now, as far as anyone else is concerned, it's entirely up to you. If you say no after an hour, no means no. Your choice. At that moment, my burner phone rang. I put it to my ear, heard what I needed to hear, and put it back in my pocket. Well, I have to go. Hope you have a nice evening. You're welcome, Chaz. 2 days later, 2 sheriffs from another county came to my apartment and said they wanted to talk to me. I suspected what the conversation would be about, but I couldn't let them know what I knew. "Where were you on Friday around 8 o'clock, Mr. Lance?" asked the younger of the 2 sheriffs. "And what do you suspect me of?" I asked in a somewhat defensive manner, which seemed to make both officers more confident. "Do you know Randy Phelps?" asked the eldest of the couple. "By now you both know the answer to that question," I replied. "He's the bastard who cheated on me with my ex-wife while I was stationed overseas with the Marines. I think they are married now, and I know they had a baby a few months ago. So what is his problem with me? Does he want to know if I have a girlfriend so he can cheat on me again?" Both sheriffs smiled slightly at this, glad I was able to entertain them. "Mr. Phelps had an accident, and he won't cheat on anyone again," Junior said. "It appears he was leaving the bar and getting into his car when he was attacked by 3 criminals, and during the struggle, his gun went off, and he shot himself between the legs, so to speak. He lost his, well, and almost died before the paramedics arrived and saved him. We know that you served in some kind of special forces in the Marine Corps, so we need to know if you or someone on your team participated," the undersheriff said. "It does seem more than coincidental, doesn't it? So where did you say you were?" "I was at Red Rock for 2 hours, and before that I was at the Avon. I have a ton of witnesses, including my ex-mother-in-law, Mona Bingham. This bitch hates me, but I'm sure she'll have my back in this case." "Well, we'll double-check that, part of the job, you know, but when your own ex-mother-in-law confirms your alibi, it seems like you're above suspicion," the senior sheriff said. I waited until they were far away before I pulled another burner phone from my pocket and called Dean on my team. He answered the second call and listened. "I shot myself with dignity with your own .22, right? Very nice. Thank you, brother." 2 different sets of sheriffs returned to my house twice to try and catch me making a mistake, but it never happened. They also checked with my boss and colleagues, but found nothing. I met Chaz a few weeks later at a bar. He was in high spirits. "Your ex-mother-in-law turned out to be a wonderful woman, Phil. Derek and Scotty served her after me. I bought all the beer that night, obviously. Life returned to normal for me after that. I waited another 3 months, then asked Leanne Lazaro out on a date, as long as she didn't call me buddy. She agreed, and on our 6th date, we made passionate love for half the night. It was the first time in over a year that I had actually made love to a woman rather than just having sex, and Leanne showed me that night that she was much more than just a beautiful woman with a tough personality. 6 months later, we were engaged, and 6 months after that we became husband and wife. I left the Marines before I got married, partly because he didn't want to leave Leanne for new assignments, partly out of paranoia about what might happen if I left Lee Ann on assignments. While we were dating, she assured me that I could trust her completely during business trips because she grew up in a broken home due to infidelity, and she felt just as much aversion to infidelity as I did. I guess I didn't want to take any more risks. If you get burned once, you don't risk it a second time. As for loyalty, that apparently wasn't Tracy's strong suit. About 18 months after the birth of her first child, she had her second, and about 18 months after that, she had her third. Since it was no secret that Randy hadn't had a gun since his first child was born, thanks to all the news about his robbery, he had to endure the whispers and laughter when everyone knew his wife was cheating on him. Karma is a bitch, I guess. I was told that she named her third child, a boy, Phil. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the